Over 1 year ago, my company signed an agreement with a marketing agency for ads that aired in the months of June and July of 2022. And at first, things were amicable. We'd obviously agreed to the terms. We committed to publishing dates, delivered drafts for the ads ahead of schedule, and published them accordingly. We did our part. And yet, we still haven't been paid for them over a year later. A bit of backstory for how things work in case you're wondering. Creators like myself are approached by media marketing companies all the time, and they'll pitch big deals on behalf of brands, both big and small. It's actually quite common. Some corporations like to advertise in-house, and so they'll reach out directly to the influencer in question, but the majority, as was the case here, will use these marketing agencies as intermediaries between creators and brands. Our issue, and it's actually more than one instance of what I would regard as theft, involves one such agency, who I will happily name at this point, InfluencerStuff. This company is owned by a man named Richard Little, whose identity I can freely reveal to all of you because he chose to freely reveal it to all of us on his website, InfluencerStuff.com, which is still, from the looks of things, active. It's difficult to describe my impressions of Richard out of the gate. See, for a while, we actually didn't work with him directly, rather one of his employees, who I've decided not to name in this video since even he ended up leaving the company shortly after all of this went down. I suspect he probably saw the writing on the wall as well, but our quarrel isn't with him. See, the contract that we had signed was a net 45 EOM. That's something we don't usually do for reasons like this, but I'll talk more about that a bit later. I reached out to my brand manager regarding the past due pings I was getting on my accounting software because we hadn't been paid for the work yet, and he proceeded to contact InfluencerStuff, both via email and phone, to no avail. And look, this happens from time to time. A company will be a little late on payment, not a big deal. But we continued attempting to reach out to them, and we either have no response via email or by phone, we would go straight to voicemail. And of course, none of those messages would be returned either. So it's like, what do we do? Several weeks go by, and it was around this time we learned that our rep had abruptly left the company. We didn't ask, but it was my impression after talking with him that there were money issues behind the scenes, which should have been a sign for things to come. By the time we realized we'd hit a dead end because the owner of the company wasn't responding and our previous contact wasn't working there anymore, the first invoice was 36 days past due and the second was 6 days past due. Now, net 45 EOM means that we aren't paid until 45 days after the end of the month in which our work is executed, ergo when the pre-roll in question is published. And since we published our first ad in June, InfluencerStuff could have waited until the middle of August to pay us without violating our agreement. That's potentially up to 2 full months to get square, far more than we ever typically allow in our contracts. And the issue compounded with the second integration published in July. See, this is where the net 45 EOM kind of stabbed us in the back a bit. If we had tighter payment terms, we might have seen red flags sooner and thus withheld publishing of the second ad until the first was paid. This is an error I will not soon repeat. It essentially compounded the amount due and took ad spots away from brands who actually would have paid on time, or heck, even paid at all. Fast forward to October 10th, 2022, I write an email to the brand involved in this transaction. Now this is, remember, the other side of the equation, right? The brand reaches out to the marketing agency reaches out to us. The marketing agency isn't responding to us, so I'm going around them to the big player, right? The big brand involved in this deal. And I scraped together as many relevant emails as I could from sites like LinkedIn, etc., and informed all of them in one large email that you're seeing here of our issues with InfluencerStuff. See, from their side of things, they'd long since paid InfluencerStuff for the contracted work. At least that's what I expected. The middleman will take a cut and then we'll pay the creator shortly thereafter. That's how it's supposed to work. But I fully expected the brand in question to be totally caught off guard by this, since in their eyes, they had already paid for the work to be done. And that was sort of kind of it, right? Maybe they get a performance review or something from the marketing agency after 30 days or so, but if they weren't responding to us, they probably weren't responding to them either. But at this point, I at least wanted them to know who they were in bed with, a sleazy troglodyte who refused to pay his debts. In fact, even worse, he accepted their money for the integration and essentially ran off with it. So he not only stole from us and the work that we did, but he also stole from the brand, if you want to frame it that way. And, you know, that makes me feel some kind of way. I'm obviously a bit bitter about not being paid by the person who should have paid. But at this point, it's not really about me anymore since already so much time has gone by, but more about what he could potentially be doing to other people. Now, that same day I reached out to the brand, reps from them responded, and I'm so glad they did because after hearing how we'd been treated and ghosted by Richard Little and InfluencerStuff, the company agreed to sever all ties with the agency, which at this point was my primary concern. Again, chances were if they were doing this to us, then they were likely doing it to others at the same time. And sure enough, other creators had, unsolicited, approached us about literally identical issues, not being paid and then being ghosted by Richard. They even made our Discord server, maybe more than one Discord server from what I heard, to address their grievances. And after some digging, we also found other scandals to which he had been accused of personally.
Now, a couple months prior to this, Richard had fired every single person working for him at InfluencerStuff and told me it was because they were all stealing from him. The nerve of this guy, I swear. But having spoken to those ex-employees, they all said they quit citing ethical reasons and the fact that Richard owed them a lot of money. I also knew that several content creator friends of mine were owed money by Richard, and then I also remembered that years ago, before I even started working with Richard, an in-real-life friend of mine warned me not to work with him for this exact reason. He had done a branding deal with Richard, and Richard didn't pay him for like a year. In this moment, my brain had already pieced together what had happened. He had obviously taken the funds and who knows what he's done with them. But the reason he can't pay me and the reason he can't pay anyone else is because he simply doesn't have our money anymore. So I asked the ex-employees if the ethical reason they left was because Richard was using content creator earned funds on other things. And they confirmed this.
A lot of money on the line here for the creator in question, a lot of risk, and then he just goes and runs away with it. Like, talk about misuse of funds, theft, and fraud. Words you just don't want to hear from the owner of any company. I will link relevant videos down in the description, and you can decide for yourself what kind of person Richard is beyond just the scope of our channel. There was likely zero chance I would ever see a dime from Richard without real pressure, so in hindsight, I wish I had followed up with those creators more to hear their stories. I think it would have added more to this video, but I at least wanted the brand in question to know what was happening behind closed doors. And if I was in their position, I'd want to know the same. Anyway, like I said, the brand quickly escalated the issue internally and only a few days later had formally cut ties with InfluencerStuff for any future media, which was fantastic news. But this is where things get interesting. See, while these conversations were taking place, because they were asking some questions, again, they had, as far as I'm aware, been totally caught off guard by all of this. Richard, who I actually shamelessly CC'd, had responded to the thread, likely thanks to pressure from the brand because he hadn't responded to any of our means of contacting him prior to that. Funny how it takes a large company to man up to his sins. Hey Greg, I apologize that it's taken this long to respond. I've been dealing with employees leaving me in the dark on where payments and campaigns were on their way out. There has been a delay as I took on the roles of a few employees. All this said, I will be sure to get you paid out ASAP.
Richard had fired every single person working for him at InfluencerStuff and told me it was because they were all stealing from him.
Now, on the surface, this could be totally plausible. I mean, the poor guy's just had everything dumped on him because his employees all abandoned him all at the same time. Why? Why did they all leave you in the dark, Richard? And why didn't you have the decency throughout any of this to at least fill us in? Knowing what I know now about how he's allegedly treated other creators, I wouldn't doubt it was intentional. But if this was an honest mistake, just let me know what's going on. Shit happens. I don't swear a lot on this channel, but that saying is so true. Shit happens. Companies misplace documents, they forget things, stuff slips through the cracks, right? We've had companies completely drop the ball in invoiced headlines and then quickly recorrect them once they're pointed out. We all make mistakes, and we don't blacklist companies for that, rarely ever, and we certainly don't make videos about them. Like I said, this has been over a year in the making here. But I think Richard choosing to remain silent for so long speaks more to his character and intentions than anything else. His communication was non-existent up until the point that we sent him to the principal's office, and even then the excuse was hard to swallow. So I told Richard that he needed to let us know when to expect both payments so that we could finally close these invoices from our books, and his response was that he'd have it done, quote, by the end of the year. I promise you that if I wasn't sure of my repayment, I wouldn't be here responding. The balls this guy has. So if you knew you weren't going to repay us, you wouldn't be responding? Am I reading that correctly? Surely I am, because that's exactly what you've done up until this point. On October 25th, the brand asked for the invoice shared between us and InfluencerStuff, but I wanted to give Richard one last chance to prove himself. So I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And this will not surprise you. Over a month goes by without ever hearing from him again. And you can tell by my replies at this point that I am quickly losing my patience. Only when we invoke a conversation does he ever feel the need to reply to us at this point. You've insisted on paying, and we've given you well over an additional month to make this right. The invoices in question are now roughly 4+ months overdue, and we've received no follow-ups since your last email. The next day, from Richard, hey Greg, I've yet to be able to make this payment. I told you I will pay, and will do so. This is the first response to my last email, and I thought I had already lost you. This guy, he's a real piece of work here. Glad to see the response, and we'll get you paid out as quickly as possible. Does he think I'm stupid? Does he not think that money has a time value associated with it? Does he not care what's in our agreements? Does he not care how this makes his company look? Hey Richard, we need a date, not the repeated ASAP line you've been feeding us. If this ventures into 2023 without payment, we will need to seek litigation for what is owed. And after doing a bit of research, this likely would have been futile in hindsight, since he appears to be in severe tax debt. Hey Greg, I don't have a clear idea and wish I did. End of year sounds like a reasonable timeline. That was 9 months ago, and we haven't heard from him since. Behind the scenes, the brand had also been attempting to squeeze payment out of Richard on our behalf, but they let us know on December 15th that he'd been refusing to provide any updates to them either. They also let us know that they technically had no legal recourse against Richard, at least with regards to the payment, because they had already paid the agency on their side. They even shared their own accounts payable. Fortunately, that picture is not in the email chain any longer. I'm sure it expired, but they did confirm to us that they had paid InfluencerStuff. And as expected, it was a number that was slightly higher than what we had agreed with the agency, because the agency has to take a cut. Now, I never actually expected the brand to pay near double what they had originally intended for the ads in question. I also appreciated them going to bat for us. Heck, they even managed to get him to respond to us finally after all those months. But the story doesn't stop there. Out of sheer principle, and with what little dignity I had left in this transaction, I informed the brand that I would be removing the pre-rolls associated with the missing payments. I understand from the brand's point of view why they'd be upset that we do this, because in their eyes they paid, but they did not pay us. We received nothing for the airing of these ads. And so I felt as though I was justified, right? If I, the creator, am not seeing payment, then I don't publish. I wasn't totally sure I had the full backing of contract law behind me. I didn't hire a lawyer or ask him a question about these things. And I'm very aware that my viewers might not fully back me on this decision either. But I do want to be transparent with all of you about what took place, especially in this part. And upon hearing this, the brand offered to cover our costs of both pre-rolls. They did not want them taken down, even though, I mean, most of the views on those videos had already been accrued, right? It's not like we're at the same viewership on those videos that we were when they first went live. But they wanted to keep them up, and I appreciated the gesture. I accepted under the condition that I return their payment should Richard finally pay us for what was owed, and that made complete sense to me. So we signed some documents, and they sent the payment over. At that point, I could finally pay my brand manager, who was also in on this, right? He had a piece of the pie. He wasn't paid either for this work because of Richard. So there were really two aggrieved parties here, directly aggrieved. And so I was able to finally make it right with him as well. But it really puts us in a tough spot with the brand, because in their eyes, this entire ordeal has cost them much more than they ever expected for a channel our size, right? I mean, I feel it damages our reputation by association. And despite how much my family loved their products, on top of the sheer number of views each ad received, we've yet to be contacted by them for any additional advertising. And I honestly can't say I really blame them. It was a nasty mess. Richard Little, by the way, is still listed as the sole team member of InfluencerStuff. This site, like I said, is still active. He calls himself a CEO on his LinkedIn account and marks the company as still being active today. In fact, Richard himself is plenty active on LinkedIn from the looks of things, commenting on posts as recently as a few weeks ago. He's made over 500 connections and has nearly 2,000 followers. Heck, he gloats about his industry connections on his website, listing noteworthy brands like, get this, Universal, Nvidia, even Discord. I mean, he boasts about his, quote, authentic activations with heavy hitter creators like iJustine, Unbox Therapy, and Linus Tech Tips. If I were any of these creators, I'd want my name as far away as freaking possible from InfluencerStuff. I mean, knowing what I know now about how they treated us and other creators, allegedly, I don't really want to have anything to do with the guy, other than maybe this video, just coming clean on what's happened and why we feel the need to publicize this. It's not us trying to whine and complain about money we didn't get, because ultimately we did. I mean, the brand stepped up. Rather, this is more for other creators who might be reached out by him in the future and who might fall for the same lies that we did. I don't care much for LinkedIn. I never really have. I don't care much for a website that likely sees little to no organic traffic, but this guy's still out there. He's still doing his thing from the looks of it. And that's what prompted me to make this video. Again, I had been sitting on this for over a year and I was unsure of whether I ever wanted to say anything publicly, but after seeing the damage that he's already done to others and what he's probably doing currently, it would be wrong of me not to make this video. I have hoped that at some point this year, he would reach out again and say, hey, Greg, I'm sorry it's taking me so long, but I finally have your payments. Like, that would make me so happy. Nothing would make me happier than just to return the brand's money that they never should have sent, to be fair, in the first place. And I still, I mean, just to be honest with all of you, I feel guilty for taking that money. I question whether or not I even should have ethically. But this whole ordeal with Richard has just completely soured everything. I think he's an abashed crook. I know for a fact he stole from me and my brand manager, and that he's very likely done it to others as well. Obviously, I don't make videos like these very often. I hate all the dramatic BS that I see, even in the tech space. But there are likely other creators out there who have been and who will be approached by InfluencerStuff, or even Richard himself, under a new agency. Do not do business with this man. Remember his name, Richard Little. Thanks for watching.